Daniel and Claire Whitmore had just started their new life together. A honeymoon in Cape Town, South Africa, was supposed to be the perfect way to celebrate. But on the morning of July 10, 2011, everything took a horrifying turn. A hotel housekeeper knocked on their door at the Ivory Sun Resort. No answer. She tried again, still nothing. Assuming they were sleeping, she used her master key to enter. What she saw inside would haunt her forever. Claire was the first thing she noticed. She was slumped over the bed, her blonde hair covering most of her face. Her skin looked pale, almost colorless, and there was dried blood near her lips. The room smelled strange, a mix of wine, expensive cologne, and something bitter. The housekeeper froze, panic creeping in, but before she could even process what was happening, she spotted Daniel. He was in the bathroom, collapsed against the floor. His body was twisted unnaturally, his fingers clenched like he had been in pain. Next to him, a broken wine bottle had spilled deep red liquid onto the floor. The scene was too perfect. No forced entry, no mess, nothing stolen. Something was very wrong. By the time police arrived, the reality was clear. This wasn't an accident. Someone had planned this, and as investigators started piecing things together, they realized this was more than just a tragic honeymoon. It was the result of something far more disturbing, and it all started long before Daniel and Claire ever landed in Cape Town. The call to emergency services sent detectives rushing to the Ivory Sun Resort. By 9:25 a.m., officers from the South African Major Crimes Unit were inside Suite 417, trying to make sense of what had happened. Lead investigator Detective Lucas Vanderberg had seen his share of crime scenes, but this one felt different. There were no broken locks, no signs of struggle, and nothing out of place, yet two people were dead. The crime scene told a quiet but chilling story. On the nightstand, two half-empty glasses of red wine sat untouched, their deep color clouded by an unknown residue. A plate of seafood remained on the room service tray, the leftovers carrying a faint, unpleasant smell. Nothing appeared violent, yet both Daniel and Claire had died in clear distress. Forensic teams moved quickly, collecting evidence from every surface. Hours later, toxicology reports confirmed the suspicion: cyanide. The poison had been found in the wine, the food, and in both victims' bloodstreams. This wasn't a case of food poisoning or an accidental overdose. Someone had deliberately made sure Daniel and Claire never left that room alive. Then, a break in the case. Security footage from the night before showed an unknown woman entering the resort lobby. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, carried a small black bag, and walked with purpose. She never stopped at the front desk, never interacted with staff. She simply vanished into the hallways. Whoever she wasn't just passing through. And now, detectives had their first real lead. With cyanide confirmed as the cause, detectives focused on how the poison was delivered. It didn't take long to find the answer. Lab tests showed traces of cyanide in both the wine and the seafood. It was mixed in just enough to be undetectable at first, but strong enough to kill within hours. This wasn't a random act. Whoever did this had planned every detail. The timeline became clearer. Daniel and Claire had enjoyed a private and sweet dinner the night before. The resort offered this as a special honeymoon experience, allowing couples to dine alone without interruptions. The food was delivered, but for a brief moment, it was left unattended. That was the opportunity. Someone had access to their suite and enough time to lace their meal with poison. By piecing together the evidence, detectives determined the couple started feeling the effects around midnight. Guests in nearby rooms recalled hearing violent coughing and strange choking sounds, but no one thought much of it at the time. By the time Daniel made it to the bathroom, it was already too late. Claire never even made it out of bed. Now, investigators knew two things for sure. This was a murder, and it was carefully planned. But they still had one major question. Who had the motive to kill Daniel and Claire? That answer would come soon, and it would reveal a past that Daniel thought he had left behind. As detectives reviewed security footage, one person stood out. At 10:15 p.m., just hours before Daniel and Claire's final meal, a woman entered the Ivory Sun Resort. She didn't check in, didn't speak to staff, and didn't hesitate. She walked straight through the lobby, glancing toward the elevators before disappearing from the camera's view. She carried only a small black bag, her face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. There was no record of her staying at the resort, no sign that she was a guest. But her presence that night, just before the poisoning, wasn't a coincidence. Investigators knew they had to find out who she was. They pulled guest lists, room logs, and employee records, searching for any clue that might reveal her identity. Nothing. Whoever she was, she had covered her tracks well. But then, detectives made a breakthrough. An old phone record linked Daniel to a name that hadn't come up before, Amelia Carson. Amelia wasn't just anyone. She was Daniel's former girlfriend. A woman from his past that he had erased from his life. And now, after years of silence, she had found him again. But this time, she didn't come for closure. She came for something else. Detectives didn't have to dig too deep to figure out who Amelia Carson was. She and Daniel had been together for years, starting in 2008. Their relationship was passionate, intense, and for a long time, Amelia believed he was the one. But in 2011, everything changed. Without warning, Daniel cut her off completely. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. At first, Amelia tried to reach him. Calls, texts, emails. She wanted answers. But Daniel had already moved on. He was with Claire now, planning a wedding, starting fresh. To him, Amelia was part of his past. But to her, their story wasn't over. The more he ignored her, the more she obsessed over what had gone wrong. Investigators traced Amelia's movements in the months before the wedding. That's when things got disturbing. She had looked up Daniel's travel records, tracked his upcoming honeymoon plans, and even purchased a one-way ticket to Cape Town. This wasn't a coincidence. She had been planning something long before Daniel and Claire even arrived at the resort. It was now clear to detectives that Amelia hadn't just shown up by chance. She had followed Daniel across the world, and after years of feeling discarded, she had finally decided to make sure he would never forget her. Amelia and Daniel's relationship had started like any other. It was exciting, full of promises, and for a while, Amelia believed she had found the person she would spend her life with. But what she didn't know was that Daniel was never fully committed. While she saw a future, he saw something temporary. And in early 2011, Daniel decided it was time to move on, without telling her. One day, he was affectionate, making plans. The next, he was gone. No warnings, no explanation, just a sudden disappearance from her life. When Amelia finally learned the truth, it wasn't from him. It was from social media. Photos of Daniel and Claire flooded her feed. A new relationship, a wedding announcement. The man she loved had replaced her as if she never existed. The final blow came in June 2011. A week before his wedding, Daniel reached out. He wanted to meet. He told Amelia he was having doubts, that he wasn't sure about Claire, that maybe he had made a mistake. For a brief moment, she thought this was it, her chance to win him back. She met him at a Manhattan hotel, convinced that this time, he meant it. By morning, he was gone. No calls, no explanations, just a cold realization that she had been used one last time. Then, a few days later, she saw the photos. Daniel and Claire, smiling on a yacht in Cape Town, celebrating their honeymoon. That's when everything inside Amelia changed. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was something else. And she wasn't going to let it go. Seeing Daniel and Claire's honeymoon photos was the final straw. Amelia had spent weeks trying to process everything, his lies, his sudden disappearance, and the way he had tossed her aside. But now, it was clear. He had never cared. While she had been drowning in heartbreak, he had been sipping champagne on a beach, acting like she never existed. She tried to move on, but the anger wouldn't go away. It wasn't just about losing Daniel, it was about how easily he had erased her. She had given years of her life to him, believing in a future that was never real. And now, he was living the life he had promised her, but with someone else. The betrayal cut too deep, and she couldn't let it go. On July 5, 2011, Amelia booked a flight to Cape Town. She wasn't going for a vacation. She wasn't looking for closure. She was going there with a plan, using a fake name. She checked into a small hotel not far from the Ivory Sun Resort. For the next few days, she watched from a distance, learning their routines, waiting for the right moment. Then, on July 8th, Claire made a mistake, another social media post. A picture from a private beachside dinner. Daniel's hand resting over hers, the caption reading, "The happiest night of my life." For Amelia, that was it. That was the moment she decided. If she couldn't have Daniel, then neither could Claire. And soon, neither of them would have a future at all. Amelia had always imagined seeing Daniel again, but not like this. Not as a happy newlywed with someone else. The pain turned into something darker, an obsession. She replayed every moment in her mind, every promise he had made, every lie he had told. The more she thought about it, the more she convinced herself that Daniel hadn't just left her. He had destroyed her, and now she was going to return the favor. By the time she landed in Cape Town, she had already planned her next move. She checked into a small hotel under the name Veronica Daniels and paid in cash. No credit cards, no digital trail. She spent the next few days watching Daniel and Claire from a distance, tracking their schedule. They were easy to follow. Private yacht cruises, wine tastings, beachside dinners. Every post Claire made gave Amelia more information. On the night of July 9th, Amelia finally made her move. She knew the resort offered a private dining experience for honeymooners, a chance for couples to enjoy a romantic meal in their suite. She also knew that once the food was delivered, there was a short window before the couple sat down to eat. That was all she needed. Dressed to blend in, she slipped into the resort undetected. The security footage would later confirm it. 10:15 p.m., a woman in a wide-brimmed hat carrying a small black bag walked through the lobby without hesitation. She didn't stop at the front desk. She didn't talk to anyone. She had one goal. And by the time she left, the meal sitting in Suite 417 was no longer just food. It was a death sentence. Amelia had planned everything down to the last detail. She didn't need weapons, didn't need to force her way in, just a few minutes alone with their dinner. That was enough. The resort prided itself on privacy, which meant once room service delivered the meal, no staff would enter the suite again. That gave her a window of opportunity. Earlier that day, she had bought a bottle of high-quality South African wine, nearly identical to the one Daniel had ordered. The only difference, hers was laced with cyanide. Slipping into the resort unnoticed, she switched the bottles and carefully mixed poison into the seafood dish. There was no mess, no struggle, no sign that anything had been touched. By the time she walked out of the resort, the job was done. Daniel and Claire had no idea what was waiting for them. They poured the wine, toasted to their future, and enjoyed what they thought was a perfect evening. By midnight, the poison had begun to take effect. Claire was the first to feel it. Sharp stomach pain, dizziness, and then a sudden inability to breathe. Daniel followed moments later, staggering toward the bathroom, trying to make sense of what was happening. By the time it was over, neither of them stood a chance. The poison worked exactly as planned, silent, quick, and impossible to stop once it started. By morning, when the housekeeper unlocked the door, Amelia was already gone, and the newlyweds were nothing more than a tragic headline waiting to be written. Daniel and Claire's last night together seemed perfect. A private dinner in their honeymoon suite, a bottle of fine wine, and the sound of waves crashing in the distance. They had no idea their final meal had been tampered with. No strange taste, no bitter aftertaste, just a slow-acting poison that would take effect when it was too late to do anything about it. Around 11:45 p.m., guests in the room next door reported hearing something unusual, coughing, deep and violent. It lasted for several minutes, followed by a disturbing choking sound, then silence. At 12:10 a.m., Daniel managed to get to the bathroom, likely trying to throw up or find relief. But cyanide doesn't work that way. Once it enters the bloodstream, there's no reversing it. Claire never made it out of bed. The poison shut her body down fast, leaving her unconscious before she could call for help. Daniel lasted a little longer, but not by much. When he collapsed on the bathroom floor, his hands were still gripping his stomach in pain, his body twisted from the sheer agony of his final moments. By the time morning arrived, everything was still. The room was undisturbed, the door locked from the inside, the scene almost too perfect. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked like the couple had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. But to the detectives who walked into Suite 417, it was clear this was no accident. Someone had planned this down to the smallest detail, and now they had to figure out who. By the time hotel staff discovered the crime scene, Amelia was already gone. She hadn't checked out, hadn't left any trace of her stay, because officially, she was never there. Using a fake name and cash payments, she had erased her presence from the resort. But she didn't disappear completely. Security footage showed her leaving the Ivory Sun Resort just after midnight, walking calmly through the lobby. No panic, no rushing. She didn't act like someone who had just committed murder, because to her, this wasn't a crime. This was justice. Hours later, detectives traced her last known location to a small motel on the outskirts of Cape Town. But by the time they got there, the room was empty. The search for Amelia Carson quickly turned international. Border security was alerted, airports were checked, but she had planned ahead. Days before the murder, she had already secured a new identity. When authorities checked flight records, they found something chilling. Someone matching her description had attempted to board a flight out of South Africa. She almost made it, but something went wrong at the final security checkpoint. A routine scan flagged an issue with her ID. In those few extra seconds of delay, she realized she was caught. Before officers could reach her, she vanished into the airport crowd. Now, Amelia wasn't just a person of interest, she was a fugitive on the run. And the clock was ticking. Amelia had slipped through security, but she wasn't safe yet. With her fake identity flagged, authorities knew she was still in South Africa. The problem was finding her. She had no credit cards, no phone records, and no digital footprint. It was like she had vanished into thin air. But then, a motel worker in Cape Town reported something strange. A woman had checked in under a different name, paying in cash. She kept to herself, barely spoke, and didn't leave her room. Housekeeping went in once and found her sitting in the dark, completely still, as if she were lost in thought. When the worker saw Amelia's photo on the news, he was sure it was her. But by the time police arrived, the room was empty. Days later, another sighting. A woman matching Amelia's new appearance, now with jet black hair, was caught on a store's security camera in Johannesburg. She bought hair dye, scissors, and blank ID cards, all in cash. The clerk later told investigators that something about her felt off. She barely spoke, didn't make eye contact, and left without waiting for change. Amelia wasn't just hiding, she was preparing to disappear for good. Each move was calculated, each identity change bringing her closer to freedom. But even the smartest fugitives make mistakes, and soon, she would make hers. Amelia had managed to stay ahead of the authorities, but she couldn't run forever. Her movements were unpredictable, her disguises changed often, but she was still leaving behind small clues. It was only a matter of time before someone recognized her. That moment came on July 22, 2011, when a hotel worker in Johannesburg noticed a guest who seemed too familiar. She had checked into an Airbnb under another fake name, kept her curtains shut, and never ordered food. The worker had been following the case closely, and something about this woman didn't sit right. He quietly called the police. Within hours, officers surrounded the property, moving in before she had a chance to escape again. When they broke down the door, they found her sitting in the dark, just like before. She didn't run, didn't protest, didn't even ask why they were there. She simply looked up at the officers, her face emotionless, and said 4 words. "He promised me forever." It was over. Amelia Carson was finally in custody. The arrest made headlines around the world. The woman who had planned the perfect crime, who had spent weeks outrunning authorities, had been caught without a fight. Now, she wasn't just a fugitive, she was a murderer facing trial. And soon, the world would hear the full story of what she had done. Amelia Carson's trial became a media sensation. Reporters filled the courtroom, true crime forums dissected every detail, and legal experts debated whether she was a cold-blooded killer or a woman driven to the edge. But for the prosecution, there was no question this was a planned, deliberate act of murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and Amelia showed no signs of remorse. The jury watched security footage of her entering the resort. They saw her calmly walking through the lobby, carrying the black bag that likely held the cyanide. Forensic experts testified that the poison had been mixed with precision, ensuring that it would take effect only after the victims had consumed most of their meal. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, methodical, and impossible to explain away. Witnesses also came forward, painting a picture of Amelia's obsession with Daniel. Old text messages, travel records, and even her internet search history showed months of planning. The prosecution revealed the most chilling detail. She had bought the cyanide 6 weeks before Daniel and Claire's honeymoon. This wasn't a last-minute decision. It was something she had been preparing for long before they even set foot in Cape Town. On April 26, 2012, after only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict, guilty on all counts. Amelia showed no reaction as the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with gasps, tears, and quiet relief. For Daniel and Claire's families, justice had finally been served. But for Amelia, her fight wasn't over yet. Now, she had a lifetime to sit in a prison cell and think about the man she once swore she loved. Even after the trial ended, the story of Amelia Carson didn't fade away. It became one of the most talked about cases of the decade. True crime documentaries, books, and podcasts all tried to make sense of what had driven her to commit such a brutal act. Some saw her as a scorned woman who let heartbreak consume her. Others believed she had always been dangerous, waiting for the right moment to strike. For Daniel and Claire's families, there was no debate. They had lost a son, a daughter, a future that should have been filled with love and happiness. No amount of media coverage could bring them back. Claire's sister, Melissa, later spoke about the verdict, saying, "People ask if we got justice, but there's no justice when 2 innocent lives are taken." As for Amelia, she spent her first years in prison the same way she had spent her final days of freedom, silent. She refused interviews, ignored letters, and never spoke about what she had done. Psychologists analyzed her behavior, trying to understand if she felt guilt or if she truly believed Daniel had deserved what happened. But Amelia never gave an answer. The honeymoon murders became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how love, betrayal, and obsession can lead to something far darker. And while the world moved on, one fact remained unchanged. For Daniel and Claire, forever had lasted only 2 weeks. But for Amelia, it would stretch on for a lifetime behind bars.